The woman's hands were caked with dirt when Samuel first saw her, kneeling beside a fresh grave on the outskirts of Superior, Arizona. And something about the way she moved made him pull his horse to a stop. It was late spring in 1883, and the desert heat already shimmered across the cemetery grounds. Samuel Morrison had ridden into Superior 3 days prior, looking for work at the silver mines that had drawn hundreds of prospectors to this corner of Pinal County. He had not expected to find a woman alone, methodically digging holes around a burial plot with hands that clearly belonged to someone unused to such labor. Her dress was dusty but well made, black as mourning required, and her dark hair kept escaping from its pins as she worked. He dismounted quietly, not wanting to startle her, but she must have heard his boots on the rocky ground because she looked up. Her eyes were brown and red-rimmed from crying, though no tears fell now. She could not have been older than 22, and her face held a peculiar mixture of determination and devastation that made Samuel's chest tighten. "May I help you remember?" he asked, removing his hat. The words came out softer than he intended. She stared at him for a long moment, confusion flickering across her features. "I beg your pardon," Samuel gestured to the small cloth sacks beside her, filled with what looked like flower bulbs and seedlings. "Help you remember, with the planting. That is what you are doing, is it not?" The woman sat back on her heels, wiping her forehead with the back of her hand and leaving a streak of dirt. "I do not know you." "No, madam. I am Samuel Morrison. I arrived in Superior a few days back." He took a step closer, still holding his hat respectfully. "I have no kin buried here, and no particular business in town this afternoon. Seems to me those holes are giving you trouble in this hard ground." Something in her expression shifted, not quite softening but acknowledging the truth of his observation. The desert soil was unforgiving, full of rocks and roots from the scattered mesquite trees. "Catherine Cooper," she finally said. "And yes, the ground is difficult." Samuel moved to the grave's opposite side and knelt, pulling out his knife to work at the compacted earth. Catherine watched him for several moments before returning to her own digging. They worked in silence for a while, the only sounds the scraping of metal against stone and the distant calls of ravens. "Who are you planting for?" Samuel asked after they had prepared several more holes. Catherine's hands stilled. "My brother, Thomas. He was 24. I am sorry for your loss. Everyone is sorry." Her voice carried an edge now. Sorry does not bring him back. Sorry does not change what happened. Samuel continued digging, giving her space to speak or not speak as she chose. After a few minutes, Catherine reached for one of the cloth sacks and carefully withdrew a small plant with delicate white flowers. "Desert marigolds," she said quietly. "They were his favorite. He used to say they were proof that beautiful things could grow anywhere if they were stubborn enough." She placed the plant into one of the holes Samuel had prepared, her movements gentle despite her earlier roughness. Thomas was like that, stubborn, optimistic even when he had no reason to be. Samuel helped her fill in the soil around the roots, pressing it firm. "How long ago did he pass?" 4 days. Catherine's voice cracked slightly. "There was an accident at the mine, a tunnel collapse. They pulled out 7 men, only 2 survived. Thomas was not one of them." The silver mines of Superior were notorious for such disasters. Samuel had heard the stories in the saloons, the warnings from other workers. Men went into the earth and sometimes did not come back out. It was the gamble they all took for the promise of wages that beat farming or cattle driving. "You came here alone?" Samuel asked. "From where?" "Tucson." "My father and I. He is back at the boarding house. He cannot bear to come to the cemetery yet." Catherine planted another marigold, her jaw set tight. "Thomas came to Superior 6 months ago. He wrote to us about the opportunities, the money he was saving. He wanted to buy land, start a cattle ranch. He had it all planned. They continued planting as the afternoon sun climbed higher. Samuel learned that Catherine had been raised in Tucson after her mother died when she was young. Her father was a shopkeeper who had built a modest but respectable business. Thomas had been restless, wanting more than what Tucson offered, and the silver boom in Superior had called to him like so many other young men seeking their fortunes. He sent money home every month, Catherine said, placing the last of the marigolds. More than he should have. I know he was living in a terrible boarding house, eating poorly, working himself to exhaustion, all so he could save faster. She brushed dirt from her hands, though it did little good. I told him in my letters to slow down to take care of himself. He wrote back that he was young and strong, and there would be time for rest when he was rich. Samuel stood, offering his hand to help Catherine up. She hesitated only a moment before accepting. Her palm was warm and calloused from the afternoon's work. "The marigolds will grow," Samuel said, looking at the neat ring of flowers now surrounding the grave. "They will remind everyone who passes that someone loved him." Catherine's eyes filled with tears for the first time since Samuel had arrived. "Thank you for helping. You did not have to stop." "I know." They stood together as the sun began its descent toward the Superstition Mountains in the distance. The cemetery was quiet except for the wind moving through the creosote bushes. Finally, Catherine gathered her empty sacks and turned toward the cemetery gate where a small wagon waited. "May I drive you back to town?" Samuel asked. "Your wagon does not look meant for one person to handle alone." "It was Thomas's," Catherine said. "He bought it last month, wrote to me that it was the first piece of his future ranch." Her voice was steady now but hollow. "I suppose I should sell it, along with everything else he owned." Samuel helped her into the wagon seat and tied his horse to the back before climbing up beside her. The road into Superior was rough, cutting through rocky terrain dotted with saguaro cacti and palo verde trees. The town itself had grown rapidly around the silver mining operations, a collection of rough wooden buildings and tents that would likely disappear as quickly as they had appeared once the silver ran out. "Where are you staying?" Catherine asked as they navigated a particularly rocky stretch. "The bunkhouse behind the Lucky Dollar Saloon. Not fancy, but it is cheap, and the roof does not leak much." "And you are here for the mines?" Samuel nodded. "Though after hearing about your brother, I confess my enthusiasm has dimmed considerably." "You should find other work," Catherine said firmly. "The mines are death traps. The owners care nothing for the workers. They will replace you as easily as they would a broken shovel." "What other work is there in Superior?" "I do not know, but anything has to be safer than going underground." Catherine pulled the wagon to a stop in front of a 2-story building with a sign reading Cooper's Boarding House. She turned to look at Samuel directly. Thomas was careful. He was smart and strong and cautious, and he still died in the dark, crushed under tons of rock. "Do not let that be your story too." Samuel helped her down from the wagon, and they stood facing each other in the dusty street. Up close, he could see the fine lines of exhaustion around Catherine's eyes, the way she held herself with rigid control as if afraid she might shatter if she relaxed even slightly. "When do you return to Tucson?" he asked. "I do not know. A week, perhaps. My father needs to settle Thomas's affairs, collect his wages, sell his belongings." She clutched the empty sacks against her chest. "I dread it, going through his things, packing up what little he had. It makes it so final." "If you need help," Samuel said, "I am willing. I know I am a stranger, but sometimes that makes it easier. No shared memories to make it harder." Catherine studied his face, and Samuel found himself hoping she would accept. There was something about her that had caught hold of him from the moment he saw her planting those flowers, something beyond mere sympathy for her grief. "Why would you do that?" she asked. "Help a stranger." Samuel considered the question honestly. "My mother died when I was 15. My father followed a year later. I had to pack up our homestead alone, sell everything they had worked for to pay debts. I wished desperately that someone had offered to help shoulder that burden. Perhaps I can be that someone for you." Catherine's expression softened. "I am sorry. That must have been terrible. It was a long time ago. I am 26 now. I have made my peace with it, mostly." Samuel shifted his weight, suddenly aware of how dusty and trail-worn he must look. "But the offer stands if you want it." "Let me think about it," Catherine said, "and discuss it with my father. But thank you, Samuel Morrison. You have already been kinder than you needed to be." She turned toward the boarding house, then paused at the steps. "If you truly want to avoid the mines, there is a ranch about 5 miles east of here. The Bar M. I heard the owner mention he was looking for hands when he came into town yesterday. It might be worth asking." Samuel touched his hat brim in thanks and watched as she disappeared into the building. Then he unhitched his horse and rode slowly back toward his bunkhouse, the image of Catherine's tear-bright eyes staying with him long into the evening. The next morning, Samuel rode out to the Bar M ranch as Catherine had suggested. The owner, a gruff man named Henry Martin, who had been raising cattle in Arizona since before the war, looked Samuel over with a practiced eye and asked pointed questions about his experience. Samuel had grown up on a small ranch in New Mexico Territory before his parents died, and he knew horses and cattle well enough. Henry hired him on the spot with wages that were less than the mines but came with meals and a bunk in the ranch hands' quarters. "You start tomorrow," Henry said. "We are moving cattle to summer pasture up in the hills. Hard work, long days, but honest work that will not kill you in a tunnel collapse." Samuel thanked him and rode back to Superior, feeling lighter than he had in months. He collected his few belongings from the bunkhouse and paid what he owed, then found himself heading toward Cooper's boarding house without quite deciding to go there. Catherine was sitting on the front porch, mending what looked like a man's shirt. She looked up as Samuel dismounted, surprise crossing her face. "I took your advice," he said. "About the ranch, I start at the Bar M tomorrow." A genuine smile transformed Catherine's face, brief but brilliant. "I am glad, truly. I wanted to thank you for steering me right." Samuel climbed the porch steps, hat in hand. "And to ask again if you need help with your brother's things." Catherine set down her mending. "My father and I went to Thomas's boarding house this morning. His room was so small, Samuel, barely bigger than a closet, and he had almost nothing. A few clothes, some books, letters from home." Her voice thickened. "He was living like a pauper so he could send money to us that we did not even need." I wanted to weep. "Did you?" "No. My father was already weeping enough for both of us." Catherine folded the shirt carefully. "There is one more thing we must do. Thomas had a horse, a good mare named Penny. She is at the livery stable and the owner says we need to collect her or he will sell her to cover boarding fees." "I can help with that," Samuel said immediately. "I am good with horses. Would you, tomorrow?" Catherine stood, brushing wrinkles from her black dress. "I confess I do not know what to do with her. Neither my father nor I can take her back to Tucson. We came by stage. I will come by mid-morning. We can go to the livery together." They made arrangements, and Samuel left feeling as if he had been given an unexpected gift, though he was not quite sure what it was. That night, sleeping in his new bunk at the Bar M, he thought about Catherine's smile and the way her voice softened when she talked about her brother, and he realized he very much wanted to see her again. The livery stable in Superior was a large, ramshackle building that smelled of hay and horse and manure. Samuel met Catherine there as promised, and they found the owner, a bandy-legged man named Ezra who seemed relieved to see them. "Been wondering when someone would come for her," Ezra said, leading them to a stall in the back. "She is a sweet mare, good-tempered. Your brother took fine care of her." The horse was indeed beautiful, a bay mare with intelligent eyes and a white star on her forehead. She nickered softly when Catherine approached, and Catherine's composure finally cracked. She pressed her face against the mare's neck and sobbed, her shoulders shaking. Samuel paid Ezra what was owed and waited, giving Catherine privacy in her grief. Finally, she straightened, wiping her eyes. "I am sorry," she whispered. "Do not be. Grief is not something to apologize for." Thomas loved this horse. He wrote about her in every letter, how smart she was, how gentle. Catherine stroked Penny's nose. He said when he got his ranch, she would be the foundation of his breeding program. He had such plans. "What do you want to do with her?" Samuel asked gently. Catherine was quiet for a long moment. "I cannot take her with me, but I cannot bear the thought of selling her to a stranger, someone who might not treat her well." An idea formed in Samuel's mind, impulsive but feeling right. "I could take her, keep her at the barn. Henry has good pastures and treats his animals well. I would care for her as your brother did." "You would do that," "I would. And if you ever want to visit her, you would know where she is." Catherine looked at him with such gratitude that Samuel felt his heart skip. "Yes, please. That would give me such peace." They walked Penny back to the barn together, a journey that took over an hour in the growing heat. Catherine told Samuel more about Thomas, stories from their childhood in Tucson, his dreams and ambitions, the way he could make anyone laugh even when times were hard. "He would have liked you," Catherine said as they walked. "Thomas always respected people who kept their word and helped without expecting anything in return." "I expect something," Samuel admitted. Catherine looked at him sharply. "What?" "Your company. The chance to know you better." Samuel kept his eyes on the road ahead. "I know the timing is poor. I know you are grieving, but I would be lying if I said I helped you purely out of kindness. I find myself wanting to see you again, to talk with you, and I thought you should know that." Silence stretched between them, broken only by Penny's hoofbeats on the hard ground. Finally, Catherine spoke. "I should be offended, or at least put off by such forwardness. But you are not." "No," Catherine's voice was soft. "I am not, though I do not entirely understand why." They reached the barn and Samuel introduced Catherine to Henry, explaining about Penny. The rancher was agreeable, especially when he saw the quality of the mare, and he assigned her a stall in the barn next to Samuel's own gelding. "You can visit whenever you like," Henry told Catherine. "Any friend of Samuel's is welcome." Catherine thanked him, then turned to Samuel. "My father and I are leaving for Tucson in 3 days, the afternoon stage. So soon. There is nothing keeping us here now. Thomas is buried, his affairs are settled." Catherine reached out and rested her hand briefly on Samuel's arm. "But I would like to see you again before we go. If you can spare the time." "I will make the time." They agreed to meet the next day at the cemetery. Catherine wanted to check on the marigolds to make sure they were taking root properly. Samuel arrived early and found her already there, kneeling by the grave with a watering can she must have brought from town. "They are growing," she said with quiet satisfaction. "Look, this one already has new buds." Samuel knelt beside her, examining the small plants. They did indeed look healthy, their roots spreading into the desert soil. "Your brother would be pleased." "I hope so." Catherine set down the watering can and sat back, looking at the simple wooden cross that marked the grave. "I keep thinking I should feel him here. Some sense of his presence or spirit, but there is nothing. Just dirt and stones and these flowers." "Maybe that is because he is not here," Samuel said. "Not really. The best parts of him are in your memories, in the stories you tell. This is just a marker. A marker I will leave behind when I go to Tucson. Catherine's voice was tight with distress. How can I do that? How can I just leave him here alone? He is not alone. These flowers will grow and spread. Other people will pass by and see them and know that someone loved him. And you carry him with you always. Geography does not change that. Catherine turned to look at Samuel, her eyes searching his face. How did you become so wise about grief? I am not wise. I just know that holding on too tight to the dead can keep you from living. My mother would have hated that I spent a year after her death barely existing, going through motions. She would have wanted me to keep living fully. And do you? Live fully? Samuel considered this honestly. I am learning to. It has taken time. But yes, I think I am finally learning. They sat together in the cemetery as the sun climbed higher, talking about everything and nothing. Catherine told him about Tucson, about her father's shop and the small house they lived in, about her friends and the simple rhythms of her life there. Samuel spoke of his wandering years after his parents died, working ranches across New Mexico and Arizona, never staying long in any one place until now. Why did you stop here? Catherine asked. In Superior? I do not know. Fate, maybe, or just exhaustion from moving so much. Samuel plucked a blade of dried grass and twisted it between his fingers. But I think perhaps I was meant to be here, to meet you. That is a romantic notion. Is it wrong? Catherine was quiet for a long time. No, just unexpected. I came here to bury my brother, and instead I found someone who makes me think about living again. I do not know what to do with that. You do not have to do anything with it right now, Samuel said. But perhaps we can write to each other, after you go back to Tucson, if you would want that. I would want that very much. They spent the rest of the day together. Samuel showed Catherine around Superior, such as it was, and they had lunch at a small restaurant that served surprisingly good food. Catherine relaxed by degrees, her smiles coming more frequently, and Samuel found himself memorizing every detail of her face, the way her eyes crinkled when she laughed, the small scar on her chin from a childhood fall. I will miss this, Catherine said as they walked back toward her boarding house in the late afternoon. Miss you. That seems foolish after knowing you only a few days. It does not seem foolish to me. At the boarding house steps, Catherine paused. Will you come to see me off, when we leave? Of course. She reached out and squeezed his hand quickly, then disappeared inside before Samuel could respond. He rode back to the bar with his heart pounding and his thoughts in pleasant chaos. The next day was his last chance to see Catherine before she left, and Samuel worked with frantic speed through his morning chores so he could get to town early. But when he arrived at the boarding house, he found Catherine's father, Edward Cooper, standing outside looking agitated. You must be Samuel Morrison, Edward said, extending his hand. He was a thin man with graying hair and sad eyes that looked much like Catherine's. My daughter has told me about your kindness. I wanted to thank you personally. It was my honor to help, sir. Edward glanced back at the boarding house. Catherine is inside packing, but I wanted a word with you first, if I may. They walked a short distance down the street, and Edward spoke carefully. My daughter has suffered a terrible loss. She and Thomas were very close, almost like twins, though they were 2 years apart. His death has devastated her in ways she is not fully showing. I understand, sir. Do you? Edward stopped walking and faced Samuel directly. Because I see the way she looks at you. And I see the way you look at her. And while I appreciate everything you have done, I must ask your intentions. Samuel met the older man's gaze steadily. I intend to write to her with your permission, to know her better. And if she is willing, when enough time has passed and her grief is not so raw, I would like to court her properly. Perhaps visit Tucson or invite her to visit here. You have known her for days. Yes, sir. And in those 4 days I have seen more strength and grace and genuine feeling than I have encountered in years of wandering. I cannot explain it better than that. But I can promise you that I will be patient, respectful, and honest with her. Edward studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Catherine needs time to heal, but she also needs something to look forward to, something beyond grief. If you can be that for her, you have my blessing to write to her. He paused. But if you hurt her, Samuel Morrison, you will answer to me. I would expect nothing less, sir. They returned to the boarding house to find Catherine emerging with a small trunk. Her eyes lit up when she saw Samuel, and he felt that now familiar tightening in his chest. The afternoon stage was not due for another hour, so they walked to the cemetery one last time. Catherine knelt by Thomas's grave, touching the marigolds gently. "Goodbye, brother," she whispered. "I will carry you with me always, and I will come back to visit, I promise." Samuel stood back, giving her privacy, but Catherine reached out and took his hand, pulling him down beside her. "Say goodbye with me," she said. "You are part of this now, too." So Samuel knelt there in the Arizona dirt and said his own silent goodbye to a man he had never met, but who had given him the unexpected gift of bringing Catherine into his life. When they returned to town, the stage was waiting. Edward was already loading their bags and other passengers were boarding. Catherine's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Write to me," she said, gripping both of Samuel's hands. "Tell me about Penny and the ranch and everything. I will write back, I promise. I will, every week." Samuel wanted desperately to kiss her but knew it was too soon, too public. Instead, he raised her hands to his lips briefly. "Safe travels, Catherine Cooper, until we meet again. Until we meet again." She climbed into the stage, and Samuel watched as it pulled away in a cloud of dust, carrying her south toward Tucson. Edward had given him their address before boarding, and Samuel clutched the paper in his pocket like a talisman. Henry found him that evening sitting outside the barn, staring at nothing. "The girl left, I take it," the rancher said, settling onto a hay bale beside Samuel. "Yes. You going to mope, or you going to do something about it?" Samuel looked at his employer. "I am going to write to her. Court her properly if she will let me. Good. Life is too short for moping. I lost my wife 10 years back, and I wasted 2 years being miserable before I realized she would have been furious with me for it." Henry stood, stretching his back. "You are a good worker, Samuel. You can make a real life here if you want. Something worth offering a woman." That night, Samuel wrote his first letter to Catherine by lamplight, his handwriting careful and his words honest. He told her about his day, about Penny settling into the barn, about his growing fondness for the bar and its work. And he told her that he missed her, which felt both foolish and absolutely true. Catherine's reply came 2 weeks later, and Samuel nearly crushed the envelope in his eagerness to open it. Her handwriting was neat and elegant, her words warm. She wrote about the journey home, about settling back into life in Tucson, about the strange emptiness of their house without Thomas's expected letters arriving. She wrote about missing the desert around Superior, the mountains and sky. And at the end, almost shyly, she wrote that she missed him too. Thus began a correspondence that stretched through the summer and into fall. Samuel wrote every week without fail, and Catherine responded just as faithfully. Through their letters, they shared thoughts and dreams, fears and memories. Samuel learned about Catherine's love of books, her volunteer work at the church, her close friendship with a woman named Mary who ran a dress shop in Tucson. Catherine learned about Samuel's growing responsibilities at the bar, his skill with horses, his quiet ambition to someday have a small ranch of his own. As the months passed, Their letters grew longer and more intimate. Catherine wrote about her ongoing grief for Thomas, the waves of sadness that still crashed over her unexpectedly, but also about moments of joy and laughter returning to her life. Samuel wrote about his growing attachment to Arizona, to the work, to the idea of putting down real roots for the first time since his parents died. In October, Samuel wrote to ask if he might visit Tucson. Catherine's response was immediate and enthusiastic. "Yes, please come. My father and I would be delighted to host you. There is so much I want to show you, and I confess I am desperately curious to see if the man I have been writing to matches the man I met in Superior." Samuel requested a week's leave from Henry, who granted it with a knowing smile. "Bring her back here if you can," the rancher said. "We could use a woman's presence to civilize this place." The journey to Tucson took 2 days by stage, and Samuel arrived dusty and nervous. Catherine and Edward met him at the stage office, and the moment Samuel saw Catherine's face, radiant with happiness, all his nervousness vanished. "You came," she said, as if she had doubted it despite his letters. "I promised I would." They spent a wonderful week together. Catherine showed Samuel around Tucson, introducing him to her friends, taking him to her favorite places. They had dinner with Edward every evening, and the older man seemed pleased with Samuel, asking thoughtful questions about his work and plans. But the best moments were when Samuel and Catherine were alone, walking through the town or sitting in the small garden behind the Cooper's house, talking with the easy intimacy their letters had built. On his last evening in Tucson, Samuel and Catherine sat in that garden under a sky full of stars. The air was cooler now, autumn settling into the desert. "I do not want you to leave," Catherine said quietly. "I do not want to leave either, but I must, at least for now. My work is in Superior. What if I came to visit? Would that be improper?" Samuel turned to face her, taking her hands. "Catherine, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest with me. Of course. This past half-year, through all our letters and this visit, have I been courting you?" A smile played at Catherine's lips. "I certainly hope so." "And have you been allowing yourself to be courted?" "Yes." "Then I am going to speak plainly." Samuel took a deep breath. "I love you, Catherine Cooper. I think I have loved you since I saw you planting those flowers on your brother's grave, though I did not recognize it then. I know it has not been a full year since Thomas died, and I know some might say it is too soon. But I do not want to waste time pretending I feel less than I do. I love you, and I want to marry you, and I want to build a life with you. But only if that is what you want too." Catherine's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. "It is too soon by society's standards. I should be in mourning for another 6 months at least. People will talk. I do not care about people talking. I care about you and what you want." "What I want," Catherine said slowly, "is to stop feeling like I am waiting for my life to begin. What I want is to honor Thomas's memory by living fully, the way he wanted to. What I want is you, Samuel Morrison, impropriety and gossip be damned." Samuel pulled her close and kissed her for the first time, gentle and careful and full of promise. Catherine kissed him back with equal tenderness, her hands coming up to frame his face. When they finally parted, both breathless, Catherine laughed softly. "I suppose you should ask my father's permission properly. I already did. In a letter 3 weeks ago, he gave his blessing contingent on your acceptance. You were that confident I would say yes. I was that hopeful." They told Edward that evening, and the older man embraced them both with tears in his eyes. "Thomas would be happy for you," he said to Catherine. "He always wanted you to find someone worthy of you. I believe Samuel is that man." They decided on a Christmas wedding, giving Catherine time to finish a proper mourning period and for Samuel to make preparations. He returned to Superior, and threw himself into work with renewed energy, saving every penny of his wages. Henry, learning of the engagement, offered Samuel a permanent position as foreman with a small house on the ranch property. "It is not much," Henry said, "but it is sound and has 2 bedrooms, a good place to start a family." Samuel accepted gratefully and spent his spare time fixing up the house, repairing the roof and porch, whitewashing the walls. He wrote to Catherine describing every detail, and she responded with ideas for curtains and furniture placement and what they might plant in the small yard. In November, Catherine and Edward came to Superior for a visit. It was Catherine's first time returning since Thomas's death, and Samuel knew it would be difficult for her. They went to the cemetery together, and Catherine knelt by her brother's grave with tears streaming down her face. The marigolds had spread beautifully, creating a carpet of gold and white around the headstone. "You were right," she told Samuel. "He is not here, but I am glad I came. It feels like I can finally say goodbye properly." Edward stayed in town while Catherine came to see the bar and the house that would be her new home. Samuel watched nervously as she explored the small building, touching the walls and looking out the windows at the desert landscape beyond. "It is perfect," she finally said. "It needs curtains and rugs and probably 100 other things, but it is perfect because it will be ours." They sat on the porch steps as the sun set, making plans for their future. Catherine wanted a garden, vegetables and flowers both. Samuel talked about expanding the small barn so they could keep more horses, maybe start breeding them as Thomas had planned with Penny. "We could do that in his honor," Catherine said. "Build something good from what he dreamed of. Would that be all right?" It would be more than all right. The wedding took place on December 23, 1883, in the small church in Tucson. Mary stood as Catherine's maid of honor, and Henry came down from Superior to serve as Samuel's best man. Edward walked Catherine down the aisle, and Samuel felt his throat tighten when he saw her in her simple white dress, carrying a bouquet of desert marigolds like those growing on Thomas's grave. The ceremony was brief, but heartfelt. When Samuel slipped the ring onto Catherine's finger and spoke his vows, he meant every word with his whole heart. Catherine's voice was clear and strong as she made her own promises, and when the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Samuel kissed her with joy and relief and love. The reception was a modest affair at the Cooper's house, attended by close friends and family. As evening fell and lanterns were lit, Edward raised a toast. "To Catherine and Samuel," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "May your life together be filled with love and purpose. And to Thomas, who we carry always in our hearts, I believe he brought you two together, and I believe he is smiling down on this union." Everyone drank, and Catherine wiped tears from her eyes. Later, she and Samuel stood together in the garden where they had first spoken of love. "Are you happy?" Samuel asked, holding her close. "Happier than I thought possible 6 months ago. When Thomas died, I thought I would never feel whole again. But you have helped heal that broken place, Samuel. Not replace Thomas, but help me learn to live with the loss. You have done the same for me. I did not even realize how lost I was until I found you." They spent their wedding night in Edward's house, then departed the next day for Superior. The stage journey was the same route Catherine had taken when she left months earlier, but everything felt different now. She was not leaving grief behind, but traveling toward a future she had chosen. Their home at the bar welcomed them, with Henry having left a fire burning in the hearth and food in the cupboards. That first night as husband and wife, they lay together in the bed Samuel had built himself, listening to the wind outside and talking about their plans. "I want children," Catherine said. "When the time is right. I want this house filled with life and noise and love." "How many children?" Samuel asked, smiling. 3, at least. Thomas and I always said 3 was the perfect number, enough to keep each other company, but not so many you could not give them individual attention. She turned to face him. Is that agreeable to you? Anything you want is agreeable to me. Catherine laughed. Be careful making such promises. I might hold you to them. They fell into married life with surprising ease. Catherine proved to be an excellent manager of their household, stretching Samuel's wages to cover necessities and small luxuries both. She started her garden as soon as the spring planting season arrived, coaxing vegetables and flowers from the stubborn soil. Samuel worked long days on the ranch, but Henry proved to be a fair and generous employer, and the work was satisfying in ways the aimless wandering of Samuel's earlier years had never been. In February, they made a trip to the cemetery in Superior to check on Thomas's grave. The marigolds were thriving, spreading even further than before. Catherine planted a few more flowers and stood for a long while, her hand in Samuel's. I will always miss him, she said, but I think I have finally found peace with his death. He lived the way he wanted, chasing his dreams. The tragedy is that he did not get more time, but I will not dishonor his memory by refusing to live my own life fully. As spring turned to summer, Catherine began to suspect she was pregnant. When the doctor in Superior confirmed it, she rode back to the ranch and found Samuel working with a young colt in the training pen. We are going to have a baby, she announced, and Samuel dropped the lead rope in shock. Truly, truly. In November, the doctor thinks. Samuel vaulted the fence and swept Catherine into his arms, spinning her around until she laughed and protested. They celebrated that evening with Henry, who seemed almost as excited as they were. About time this ranch had a child running around, the older man said. Place has been too quiet for too long. The pregnancy progressed smoothly, though Catherine suffered from terrible tiredness in the early months. Samuel fussed over her constantly, much to her amusement. I am having a baby, not dying of consumption, she told him when he insisted she rest instead of working in her garden. Women have been doing this since the beginning of time. Not my women. My wife gets to rest. Despite her protests, Catherine secretly loved Samuel's attentiveness. Her father visited in August, bringing gifts for the baby and expressing delight at the prospect of becoming a grandfather. He stayed for a week, and Samuel enjoyed getting to know Edward better, listening to stories about Catherine's childhood and about Thomas. You have made my daughter happy, Edward told Samuel before he left. That is all any father can ask. Thank you for loving her so well. In October, they made one last trip to Thomas's grave before the baby arrived. Catherine's belly was round and prominent now, and she moved more slowly, but she insisted on going. I want to tell him, she explained to Samuel. About the baby, it feels important. At the cemetery, Catherine knelt awkwardly beside the marigolds and spoke aloud. Hello, Thomas. I am going to be a mother soon. Can you imagine? Your little sister having a child. Samuel and I are hoping for a healthy baby, boy or girl does not matter. But if it is a boy, we are naming him Thomas, after you. So your name will continue and your memory will live on in a new generation. She wiped her eyes. I think you would like Samuel. He is good and honest and works hard. He makes me laugh. He would have made a fine friend for you. I wish you could have met him. I wish you could meet your nephew or niece. But I carry you in my heart, and I will tell our children about their uncle who dreamed big dreams and died too young. Samuel helped her stand, and they walked slowly back to the wagon. That night, Catherine went into labor 3 weeks earlier than expected. Samuel rode frantically for the doctor while Henry stayed with Catherine, doing his best to keep her comfortable. The doctor arrived within the hour, and Samuel paced outside the bedroom, listening to Catherine's cries and feeling helpless. It was a long labor, lasting through the night and into the next day. Finally, as afternoon sun streamed through the windows, Samuel heard a baby's cry. The doctor emerged moments later, smiling. "You have a son, and your wife is tired but well." Samuel burst into the room to find Catherine propped up in bed, sweaty and exhausted but radiant, holding a small bundle wrapped in blankets. She looked up at him with pure joy. "Meet Thomas Edward Morrison," she said. "Named for the two best men I have ever known." Samuel sat carefully on the bed, gazing down at his son's tiny, perfect face. The baby had dark hair and his eyes were scrunched shut, his small fists waving in the air. "He is beautiful," Samuel whispered. "You are amazing. I cannot believe you did this." "We did this," Catherine corrected. "And we are going to be wonderful parents." Little Tommy, as they called him, proved to be a healthy, happy baby. Catherine took to motherhood naturally, though the sleepless nights wore on both of them. Samuel would walk the floor with Tommy in the early morning hours, singing soft songs his own mother had sung to him, while Catherine dozed. As promised, Catherine told Tommy stories about his Uncle Thomas, even though the infant could not possibly understand. "It is important," she told Samuel, "so that he knows from the beginning that he carries a legacy." Edward visited for Christmas, meeting his grandson for the first time and weeping with joy. They spent the holiday together as a family, and Catherine insisted on making Christmas dinner despite having an infant to care for. "I want Tommy's first Christmas to be special," she said. "Full of love and good food and family, the way it should be." Life settled into new rhythms. Samuel continued his work at the bar, now with even more motivation to do well and save money. Catherine managed their household and cared for Tommy while also tending her ever-expanding garden. In the spring, she started working with Penny, who proved as gentle and intelligent as Thomas had claimed. Catherine began training the mare for breeding, reaching out to other ranchers in the area to find a suitable stallion. "We are going to build that breeding program Thomas dreamed about," she told Samuel one evening as they watched Tommy crawl across the floor. "Maybe in a few years we can buy our own land, start our own small ranch, raise horses and children together." "I would like that," Samuel said, "more than anything." When Tommy was a year old, Catherine discovered she was pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was harder, with more sickness and exhaustion. Samuel worried constantly, but Catherine remained optimistic. "We wanted 3 children," she reminded him. "This is part of that plan." Their daughter, Sarah Marie Morrison, was born in August of 1885, a smaller baby than Tommy but just as healthy. She had Catherine's brown eyes and Samuel's serious expression, and Tommy was fascinated by his new sister, constantly wanting to touch her and bring her his toys. With 2 young children, life became chaotic but joyful. The little house rang with laughter and crying and the general noise of family life. Samuel built additions to the house, adding a proper nursery and expanding the kitchen. Catherine's garden flourished, providing much of their food and flowers she sold in town for extra money. Henry, who had no children of his own, doted on Tommy and Sarah, often inviting them to the main ranch house to spoil them with sweets and attention. "I am getting too old to run this place alone," he told Samuel one evening. "Been thinking about selling it and retiring, but I wanted to give you first option to buy if you are interested." The offer stunned Samuel. The bar was a substantial property, far more than he could afford. But Henry had a proposal worked out, allowing Samuel to buy it over time, making payments from the ranch's profits. "You have been like a son to me," Henry said. "I would rather see the bar go to you and your family than to some stranger who might run it into the ground." Samuel discussed it with Catherine, and they made the decision together. In early 1886, Samuel became the official owner of the Bar M Ranch, with Henry staying on in a small house on the property, officially retired but still offering advice and help when needed. "We did it," Catherine said the night they signed the papers. "We have our own ranch, our own land. Thomas would be so proud." They threw themselves into making the ranch succeed. Samuel proved to be a skilled manager, and Catherine's horse breeding program began showing profits. They hired a few ranch hands to help with the increased workload, young men who reminded Samuel of himself a few years earlier, looking for honest work and a chance to build something. In 1887, Catherine became pregnant with their third child. This pregnancy was easier than Sarah's had been, and Catherine glowed with health throughout. Their second son, James Henry Morrison, arrived in March of 1888, named for Catherine's grandfather and for Henry, who cried when he learned of the honor. With 3 children under 5, life was wonderfully exhausting. Tommy was a responsible older brother, already showing interest in the ranch work and following Samuel around whenever possible. Sarah was sweet and gentle, preferring to help Catherine in the garden. And Jamie, as they called the baby, was cheerful and easy, sleeping through the night within his first month. Every year on the anniversary of Thomas's death, the family made a trip to Superior to visit his grave. The children learned early about their Uncle Thomas, about his dreams and his death, and how he had inadvertently brought their parents together. "If he had not died, I would not exist," Tommy said one year, old enough now to understand the complexity. "Does that make me glad he died?" "No," Catherine said gently. "It means you recognize that good things can come from tragedy. We will always wish Uncle Thomas had lived, had gotten to meet you and your siblings, had achieved his dreams. But we also cherish the life we have built. Both things can be true at the same time." The marigolds at Thomas's grave had now spread so extensively that other families began planting them on their own loved ones' graves. The Superior Cemetery became known for its golden carpets of flowers, and Catherine always felt a quiet pride that her brother's memorial had beautified the whole place. As the children grew, the ranch prospered. Samuel's reputation as a fair dealer and skilled horseman spread through the territory. Catherine's breeding program produced several horses that won competitions and sold for excellent prices. They were able to hire more help, expand their herds, and make improvements to the property. Edward visited regularly, delighting in his grandchildren and clearly pleased with the life his daughter had built. His health began to decline in 1890, and Catherine convinced him to sell his shop in Tucson and move to Superior permanently. They built him a small cottage on the ranch property, and he lived there happily, spending his days playing with his grandchildren and helping Catherine in her garden. "I never imagined I would end my days on a ranch," Edward said one evening, sitting on the porch with Samuel while the children played in the yard. "But I cannot imagine a better place to be. Thank you for giving my daughter such a good life." "She gave me just as much," Samuel replied. "More, probably. I was lost before Catherine. She made me want to put down roots to build something lasting." Edward's health continued to fail through the following year, and he passed away peacefully in his sleep in October of 1891, surrounded by family. They buried him in the Superior Cemetery, not far from Thomas's grave, and planted marigolds there too. "Now you and Thomas can rest together," Catherine said at the funeral. "Watch over us together. You were both such good men." The loss of her father hit Catherine hard, but she had Samuel and the children to anchor her through the grief. And this time, she knew how to weather the storm of loss, how to mourn while still living fully. As the 1890s progressed, the children continued to grow and thrive. Tommy developed into a fine young man, skilled with horses and cattle, clearly destined to take over the ranch someday. Sarah showed artistic talent, spending hours sketching the desert landscape and the animals. Jamie was the scholar, always reading, asking endless questions about everything. In 1895, the Morrison family traveled to the Chicago World's Fair, a grand adventure that the children talked about for years afterward. They saw electric lights and exotic animals, rode the Ferris wheel, and marveled at the wonders of modern technology. "The world is changing so fast," Catherine said on the train ride home. "I wonder what it will be like when our children are grown." "Whatever it is like, they will be ready," Samuel assured her. "We have raised them well." As the century drew to a close, Samuel and Catherine were in their late 30s, prosperous and content. The Bar M Ranch was well established and profitable. Their children were healthy and happy. They had weathered losses and celebrated triumphs together, and their love had only deepened with time. On a warm evening in June of 1899, they sat together on the porch of the home they had built together, watching the sunset paint the desert sky in shades of gold and rose. The children were inside, Tommy helping Jamie with schoolwork while Sarah practiced her drawing. "Do you ever think about that day in the cemetery?" Catherine asked, leaning against Samuel's shoulder. "When you asked if you could help me remember, all the time. It was the day my life truly began. I was so lost then, drowning in grief. I could not imagine ever feeling happy again." Catherine took Samuel's hand, tracing the calluses and scars that marked years of hard work. "Thank you for seeing past the grief, for seeing me. I fell in love with you that very day, though I did not recognize it immediately. Something about your strength, your determination to honor your brother even in the midst of terrible pain. You were beautiful and brave, and I knew I wanted to be part of your life. You have been more than part of it, you have been the center of it." Catherine lifted her head to kiss him, soft and sweet. "I love you, Samuel Morrison, more now than even on our wedding day. And I love you, Catherine Morrison, always and forever." They sat in comfortable silence as stars began to appear in the darkening sky, grateful for the life they had built from grief and chance and love. Tommy graduated from school the following year and took on more responsibilities at the ranch. Sarah announced her intention to study art in San Francisco, a decision that worried Catherine but that Samuel supported enthusiastically. Jamie, at 12, was already talking about becoming a lawyer or perhaps a doctor. "Our children are going to have opportunities we never imagined," Catherine said. "The new century is going to bring such changes." The 20th century arrived with celebration and hope. The Morrison family hosted a large gathering at the ranch on New Year's Eve, inviting friends and neighbors to mark the momentous occasion. Henry, now in his 70s but still spry, led a toast. "To the new century, may it bring peace and prosperity." And to the Morrison family, who have made this old ranch hand's final years full of joy. "You are the family I never had, and I thank God for bringing you into my life." In 1902, Tommy married a young woman named Elizabeth, a rancher's daughter from near Phoenix. The wedding was held at the ranch, and Catherine wept with happiness watching her son start his own family. Sarah left for San Francisco to pursue her art studies, breaking Catherine's heart a little but also filling her with pride. And Jamie continued to excel in his studies, already accepted to university in California. As Samuel and Catherine entered their 40s, they began to slow down slightly, letting Tommy and Elizabeth take over more of the ranch operations. They spent more time together, taking long rides across their land, working in the garden, playing with their grandchildren when Tommy and Elizabeth's children began arriving. "We have built something good here," Samuel said one day, surveying the ranch from horseback. "Something lasting." "Thomas would be proud," Catherine said. "We took his dreams and made them real." They never stopped visiting Thomas's grave, though the trips became less frequent as they aged. The marigolds still bloomed every year, a living memorial that had now outlasted the memory of most people who had known Thomas in life. But Catherine made sure her children and grandchildren knew the story, knew about the uncle and great-uncle who had died chasing his dreams, and whose death had inadvertently brought their family into being. In 1910, Henry passed away at the age of 83, dying peacefully in his sleep. They buried him in Superior's cemetery with full honors, and half the county came to pay respects to a man who had been a pillar of the community for decades. The Morrison family mourned him deeply, having lost not just an employer and friend but a beloved grandfather figure. As the years continued to pass, Samuel and Catherine aged gracefully together. Their hair turned silver, their faces lined with the marks of a life well lived. They watched with pride as their children built their own lives and families. Tommy and Elizabeth ran the barn with skill, expanding it even further. Sarah became a successful artist, her paintings of the Arizona desert hanging in galleries across the country. Jamie became a lawyer as he had dreamed, working in Tucson and visiting the ranch regularly with his wife and children. In 1920, Samuel and Catherine celebrated their 37th wedding anniversary quietly, just the two of them. They took a picnic to a favorite spot on the ranch, a small rise that overlooked miles of desert and mountains. 37 years, Catherine marveled. Where did the time go? Into living, Samuel said. Into building this life together, raising our children, growing old together. He took her hand. "I would not change a single moment, not even the hard parts, the losses, especially not those. The losses taught us to cherish what we have, to live fully. We learned that from Thomas in a way. His death reminded us that life is precious and uncertain." Catherine nodded, looking out across the land they had worked for decades. "I still miss him, and my father. Sometimes the missing sneaks up on me unexpectedly. That is love. It does not end just because someone dies." They sat together as the sun set, holding hands and remembering all the years behind them, grateful for whatever years remained ahead. Samuel Morrison passed away in his sleep in 1925, at the age of 68. He had been working in the barn that afternoon, helping Tommy with a difficult mare, and seemed in perfect health. That evening, he and Catherine had dinner with their extended family, all gathered for Sunday supper, as was their tradition. He kissed Catherine good night, told her he loved her, and simply did not wake up the next morning. Catherine was devastated but also grateful. "He did not suffer," she told her children. "He died as he lived, peacefully and surrounded by love. I could not have asked for better for him." They buried Samuel in the Superior Cemetery, not far from Thomas and Edward. Catherine planted marigolds on his grave, completing a circle that had begun 42 years earlier when a cowboy had stopped to help a grieving woman plant flowers. Catherine lived another 8 years as a widow, surrounded by her children and grandchildren. She continued to work in her garden, though her pace was slower now. She wrote down the family history, ensuring that future generations would know the story of how Thomas's death had brought their family into being, how love had grown from grief. On a warm spring day in 1933, Catherine asked Tommy to drive her to the cemetery. She visited all 3 graves, talking quietly to each of the men she had loved. "I will see you all soon," she told them. "Save a place for me." She died peacefully that night at the age of 72 with her children surrounding her bed. Her last words were, "Samuel is here. He came to bring me home." They buried Catherine Morrison beside her husband, and the entire county came to pay respects to a woman who had been beloved by all who knew her. Her grandchildren planted marigolds on her grave, and the golden flowers bloomed there year after year, spreading until all 4 family graves were surrounded by a carpet of gold. The Barham Ranch remained in the Morrison family for generations, passed down through Tommy's line. The story of Samuel and Catherine became family legend, told and retold to each new generation. The little house where they had raised their children was preserved and maintained, becoming a cherished reminder of where it all began. And every spring, the descendants of Samuel and Catherine Morrison returned to the Superior Cemetery to tend the marigolds that still bloomed on the family graves, remembering the love story that had begun with a simple question: "May I help you remember?" The flowers grew on, golden and enduring, a testament to love that outlasted grief, to dreams that continued beyond death, and to a family built on the foundation of 2 hearts that found each other in the Arizona desert more than a century before.